One of my favorite exercises to teach dogs is the say please to say hi game. Now, this is the leashed version, which means that the handler is going to be holding a leash while the dog greets a stranger. And I'll kind of put stranger in air quotes here. Stranger in the beginning, when we're teaching this game, is usually someone that we know. So typically, I find someone just within the household to practice this with. And then I find someone outside of the household to work on this with. And then I work on actual strangers. Because if you start with a full-blown stranger right in the beginning, that's pretty hard for your dog to figure out. So when we're working with the stranger, that's the person that is doing the greeting. So the reason I'm clarifying that is because we have a set of handler steps, and then on the next slide, we'll have a set of stranger steps. So the steps for the handler. Quite a lot of things go into this. We're actually going to combine a bunch of different skills. So the first part is you're going to approach the stranger with your dog on a leash. You're going to stop, and you're going to stop the dog. So if you're familiar with the baby steps game, that's where we get the dog to stop and sit next to you. And then you're going to really make sure that your dog is under threshold when you do that. So what I mean by that is if your dog is already going bananas over that stranger, then they're a little bit too close. So the next time you practice, you want to stop a little bit further away. You want to stop when your dog is still able to maintain their composure. That's what we're looking for. So when I say under threshold, it means the dog is able to still focus on you and respond to your cues. So you're going to approach the stranger, you're going to stop and have the dog stop and sit next to you. You're going to release the dog to say hi. Now that's my verbal cue for the dog is go say hi, and then you allow the dog to greet. Now, I typically keep the greeting to what we call the handshake rule. It's the 3-second policy. So think about how long you would feel comfortable shaking someone's hand, how many seconds you would maintain physical contact with that person. That's about how long you want to allow your dog to do a greeting. When they're on a leash, they can't behave how they normally would if they were off leash and able to move around. So we want to keep those greetings really short and sweet and socially appropriate. So apply that handshake rule during the greeting to make sure that your dog is doing a nice, short, sweet greeting and then getting out of there. So the way we get them out of there is you're going to call the dog back to you using what we call the recall in reverse game. So if you haven't played that before, that is where you back up and you call the dog towards you. So as you're backing up, your dog turns around, runs towards you, and kind of lands right between your feet. And then I give them a big jackpot for coming back to me. I actually want to make sure the dog is getting more treats from me than they do from that stranger. I want to make sure that I'm super exciting, me being the handler, and that stranger is interesting, but not as rewarding as coming back to me will be. Now for the stranger, we have a few steps that they're going to work on, and I'm going to break this down and do a lot of repeated demos for this. So don't worry if you don't have all of this figured out quite yet. Step 1 is going to be the stranger feeds the dog a treat at the dog's nose level. Really want to make sure that treat stays nice and low to the ground, close to the dog's nose, because if the treat is up above the dog's head, then the dog is probably going to jump up to get it, and that defeats the whole purpose of this game, which is trying to get the dog to be polite while they greet. So the stranger's just going to feed a dog right at the dog's nose level, and then you're going to call the dog back to you. So you're going to have the dog go say hi, stranger feeds a goodie, you call the dog back. After the dog is doing well with that, you move on to step 2. So then step 2 is the stranger is going to lure the dog into a sit. So they're going to use that stinky treat, get the dog's attention, guide them into a sit, and then give them that treat while the dog is seated. Then you call them back as the handler. So you tell the dog to go say hi, stranger lures the dog into a sit, gives them that goodie, and then you call the dog back to you. Once you've done that a few times, then you move to step 3. Now, I'm going to mention this later in the video as well, but I don't move to step 3 until I'm willing to bet money that my dog is going to do a good job. We're really trusting the dog when we get to step 3. So want to make sure that we've practiced step 1 and 2 thoroughly enough that we can kind of trust that the dog is going to make a good choice. So step 3 is the stranger's going to wait for the dog to sit. They're not going to help them. They're not going to use a cue or a lure or anything like that. They're just going to wait and capture what we call a say please. So that's a voluntary sit. And then same thing, the stranger's going to feed the dog while the dog is in that seated position, and then the handler's going to call the dog back. If the dog is doing that part well, they're running up, sitting automatically, and then running back to the handler on a nice loose leash, all without any extra management protocols, then you can start getting creative. So that's when you want to have the stranger add in like a high-pitched voice, an animated greeting, maybe some petting. I work on kind of building this skill set in other videos. If you've ever heard me talk about the 3 T's, that's a really good way to advance this behavior as well. So you're going to work through these steps, and if the dog is doing a good job, you get to move on to the next step. If the dog is having a hard time, you probably want to move back a step and make it a little bit easier for the dog to be successful, because we want to make sure they're getting lots of good practice in. If your dog is having a few failed repetitions, then definitely make it easier for them, because there's no point in practicing poor greeting behavior. We only want to set them up for success and make sure they're doing a good job. So don't worry about how fast you get through the steps. Really focus on how successful is the dog, and are we following our protocols, so it makes it really easy for them to figure out what we're looking for. All right, so we're going to work on this game with Bailey, the golden retriever. So the stranger step number 1, where we're starting out, is feeding the dog at nose level, and then I'm the handler, I'm the blonde. So the steps are going to be to ask the dog to stop, release them to go say hi, call the dog back, and give them a jackpot. So I'm going to demo this a bunch of times so you can see what this pattern really looks like. Have the dog stop, send them to go say hi, the stranger gives a goodie, call the dog back, jackpot at my feet. Really want to create this nice consistent pattern so the dog can start predicting how this is going to go. Say hi, get the goodie, come back, jackpot. Nice job, puppy. Step 2 is the stranger's going to lure into a sit. So they use that treat to guide the dog into the position, and then the handler calls the puppy back. Now the stranger's not saying the word sit or doing any sort of cue that the dog has already learned. They're just using that piece of food to guide them. And it's really important that the handler does not allow greetings until the dog is released from that stop. So you don't get to say hi to that person until the handler says, go say hi. Want to make sure that the dog only gets reinforced when they're doing a good job. Otherwise, we just wait for them to figure out what we're looking for. You also want to maintain a short leash so the dog can't actually make contact. If the dog does jump up, that leash is short enough they can't quite reach. So really think about how long your leash is and where you're stopping your feet. Make sure that you're stopping far enough away. And at no point is the handler correcting or forcing the dog. We're just using management. So how closely you approach as the handler, how long your leash is, where your body is moving, where your feet are moving. That's what's helping the dog figure this out. I don't want to use my leash to move the dog, so to speak. I'm using my feet and my treats to move the dog. So really pay attention to the leash handling throughout this exercise. Also, to add a little bit of distance between the humans, the handler can stop further away and just hold the end of the leash. I'm getting pretty close. I'm only about 4 feet or so away from that stranger, but you can definitely stop further away if you used a longer leash or just held the end of it. Once the puppy sits, then they can go say hi, greet the stranger, get their goodie, and come back to the handler where they get their jackpot. Start the puppy over, use those treats to help. Stop far enough away that the puppy can be successful. Send them to say hi. Call them back using food and feet, not the leash. Third step is where we capture a say please. So this is where we're going to wait for the puppy to see if the puppy can make a good choice all on their own. Not quite. Close. I always look at, am I willing to bet money that the dog's going to greet appropriately? If so, we can move to step 3. There I would have lost my money on that bet because we got a little bouncy. But moving forward, Bailey does quite a good job. So he figured it out, which is what we're looking for. I always want to make sure I have a good setup. So I'm really thinking about the environment. I'm thinking about the leash. I'm thinking about my feet. I'm thinking about my treats. I'm thinking about the stranger. Really getting all those ducks in a row to help the dog be successful, and then wait for the dog to come up with the correct choice. If your management is good, then the dog will be able to figure it out really easily. If your management is kind of lacking, the dog's going to struggle a little bit more. And then if they're doing really well, you can have your stranger start talking to the dog or doing more interactive greeting behavior. Really check out that leash too. Bailey's doing a really nice job here. If you compared it earlier in the video, I was having a much tighter leash and now it's nice and slack.
Good boy. That's so good.
Nice job, puppy.